I spent $150,000 planning my son's wedding in Tuscany. The villa, the flowers, the catering, the open bar, the string quartet, every single detail came out of my retirement account. And 2 days before the flight, my son called me and said, "Dad, we need to talk. There's no seat for you at the ceremony. It's immediate family only." I had no idea that I was not considered immediate family anymore. The next morning, I had 89 missed calls. Before I tell you what I did when I landed in Italy anyway, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe a father deserves a seat at his own son's wedding, the wedding he paid for, hit like and subscribe. My name is Arthur Bellamy. I'm 68 years old. I spent 35 years building a commercial real estate firm from nothing. One office, one secretary, one fax machine that jammed every third page. I grew it into a company that managed properties across 6 states. I am not a man who complains. I am not a man who asks for gratitude. But I am also not a man who writes a check for $150,000 and then accepts a phone call telling him to stay home. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is important. You need to understand what kind of father I was before you can understand what kind of father I became. My son, Ethan, was born when I was 33. His mother, Helen, died when he was 11. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 4 months, and I spent the next 20 years being both parents at once. I drove him to soccer practice and sat through every game in the rain. I helped him with college applications at midnight after 12-hour workdays. When he was 26 and broke, I wired him $40,000 so he wouldn't lose his apartment. When he started his own consulting business at 30, I co-signed the loan knowing full well the risk. That is the resume of my fatherhood. I am not listing it because I want applause. I am listing it because you need to understand that what happened next was not a mistake. It was a calculation. Ethan met Vanessa 3 years ago at some networking event in Manhattan. She was sharp, beautiful, and had a way of looking at a room like she was already deciding what to take from it. I noticed it the first dinner we had together. The way she held her wine glass. The way she smiled at me when I talked about the firm. It was the smile of someone who was doing math. But Ethan was in love. And love makes intelligent people believe what they need to believe. I kept my mouth shut. That was my first mistake. The engagement came 18 months later. Ethan called me on a Sunday morning, his voice cracking with excitement. She said, "Yes, Dad." I told him I was happy. I was. I told him whatever he needed, I was there. That was my second mistake. The conversation about the wedding happened 2 weeks later. They came to my house for dinner. The house where Ethan grew up. The house his mother and I bought together. The house I had maintained for 30 years because I could never bring myself to sell it. Over pot roast and green beans, Vanessa laid out the plan with the efficiency of a project manager. Tuscany. A private villa. October, when the light is golden. 200 guests. A string quartet for the ceremony. A full orchestra for the reception. She had a notebook. There were tabs. I asked what the budget was. She looked at Ethan. He looked at his plate. Then he looked at me with that expression I had seen on his face since he was 7 years old. The expression that meant he needed something and he was embarrassed about it. "We were hoping you could cover it, Dad, as a wedding gift." I should have asked for a number before I said yes. I did not ask for a number. I said yes. The final invoice, which I received in the form of a spreadsheet from Vanessa's email, was $147,000. To be precise, she had added a 10% contingency at the bottom and labeled it incidentals. I wrote the wire transfers over 3 installments, not a word of thank you. Not a phone call from Ethan. A text message from Vanessa that said, "Received, thank you." Like I was a vendor who had submitted an invoice. The months that followed were busy with planning, and I was not included in any of it. When I called Ethan to ask about the rehearsal dinner, Vanessa answered his phone and told me she would send me a schedule. When I asked about the seating chart, she told me not to worry. When I asked which villa they had booked, she sent me a link to a website. I was being managed. I was being kept at a distance with the precision of someone who had decided long before I noticed that I was a funding source, not a participant. Still, I booked my own flight. Business class because I am not young and my back does not forgive long flights in coach. I arranged for a rental car. I bought a new suit, charcoal gray, because I planned to look like the father of the groom, not an afterthought. I was ready. I was proud. I was a fool. The call came on a Wednesday evening, 8 days before the wedding. I was sitting on the back porch, watching the sun go down over the yard. Ethan's voice on the line was flat in a way I had never heard before. Rehearsed, I understood later. "Dad, we need to talk about the seating." I told him I was listening. Vanessa's family is very traditional. Her parents, her grandparents, her aunts and uncles, they fill the first several rows. And the ceremony itself, the actual ceremony, is structured around immediate family only. It's a cultural thing. Her family's expectations. I waited. I was certain there was a punchline that would make this make sense. "There's no seat for you at the ceremony, Dad. We'll have a spot for you at the reception, of course. You'll be at a gray table." I sat very still on that porch. The sun had finished setting. The yard was dark. In the 30 years I had lived in that house, I had never felt it so empty. "You're telling me," I said, and my voice was steady, which surprised me, "that the man who paid for this wedding does not have a seat at this wedding. It's not about the money, Dad." "Then what is it about, Ethan?" There was a pause. I heard Vanessa's voice in the background, low and quick, feeding him the next line. "It's about honoring her family's traditions. We didn't want to upset the dynamic." "What dynamic?" "Dad, please don't make this difficult. Don't make this difficult. Don't make this difficult." That phrase. I had heard it from him before, always in moments when the difficulty was entirely of his own creation and he needed me to absorb it quietly. I had always done that. I had swallowed every difficult thing he handed me for decades. The poor grades, the bad business decisions, the money borrowed and never returned, the missed Christmases when Vanessa decided they were spending the holidays with her parents. "Not this time." "All right," I said. "I won't make it difficult." He exhaled. I could hear the relief in it. "Thank you, Dad. We'll make sure you have a great Ethan." I cut him off. "I won't make it difficult, but I am going to make it very, very clear." I hung up the phone. I sat on that porch for 2 hours. I did not cry. I am 68 years old, and I have buried a wife and built a company, and I have long since exhausted my supply of tears for people who do not deserve them. What I did instead was think. Slowly. Methodically. The way I used to think through a difficult acquisition. Mapping the assets, identifying the liabilities, determining the leverage. The leverage, I realized, sitting in the dark with the crickets going loud in the yard, was considerable. The first call I made was to my attorney, a man named Paul Reeves who had handled my contracts for 20 years and who I trusted with my life. It was 9 in the evening. He answered on the second ring because Paul Reeves is the kind of lawyer who answers at 9 in the evening. "I need to know something," I told him. "If I wire $150,000 to someone for a specific purpose, and that purpose is no longer occurring as I understood it, what are my options?" Paul was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Arthur, tell me what happened." I told him. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I pay him for. When I finished, he said 2 things. The first was that the funds, having been transferred without a written agreement specifying my inclusion, were legally complicated. The second was, "But that doesn't mean you have no options." We talked for an hour. By the time I went inside to sleep, I had a plan. I did not call Ethan back that night. I did not respond to the text message Vanessa sent the next morning. A breezy, cheerful thing about the photographer's timeline, as if the conversation had never happened. I went to the office. I worked. I had lunch with Paul. I made 2 other phone calls. One was to my travel agent to confirm my business class seat to Florence. The other was to a contact I had in international property management, A man named Franco Bassetti who managed estates across Tuscany and who owed me a favor from a deal we had done in 2019. "Franco," I said when he picked up. "I need to know about Via Marchesi." There was a pause. "The Marchesi? Beautiful property. Someone is getting married there in October, I believe." "My son," I said. Another pause. "Ah, Franco," I said. "I need some information, and I need it to be quiet." He told me what I needed to know. The villa rental contract was in Ethan's name, but the credit card on file, the card used for the security deposit and all additional charges, was mine. The black card I had given Ethan 2 years ago for business expenses, with my name on it and my account. He had used it because of course he had used it. "Franco," I said, "I'll be in Tuscany on Thursday." I landed in Florence on a Thursday morning 6 days before the wedding. The light was extraordinary. The kind of amber, slanted light that makes everything look like it was painted in the 1600s. I rented a car, drove through the cypress-lined roads into the hills, and arrived at my hotel. Not the villa where Ethan and Vanessa were staying, but a smaller property 3 kilometers away. Quiet. Private. The owner, an older woman named Signora Ferretti, made extraordinary coffee and asked no questions. I did not contact Ethan or Vanessa when I arrived. I let them believe I was home, chastened and compliant, sitting in my empty house. I had dinner alone that evening at a trattoria in the village, ordered the ribollita and a glass of Brunello, and watched the sun set over the valley. It was the most peaceful I had felt in months. The next 2 days I moved carefully. I had a long lunch with Franco Bassetti at a restaurant in Siena. He brought documents. I reviewed them. He introduced me to the villa's managing director, a precise, courteous man who shook my hand and said he was very glad to meet me, given that I was, technically, the person responsible for the account. I want to be clear about something. I did not go to Tuscany to ruin a wedding. I went to Tuscany because I was invited. I had paid $150,000 to attend this event, and I intended to attend. What I did was simply prepare for every possible scenario. Good planning is not revenge. It is just good planning. The rehearsal dinner was the night before the wedding at the villa. I was not invited. I sat on the terrace of my hotel with a glass of wine and watched the lights of the valley below and thought about Helen. She would have been furious. Helen was a quiet woman, but she had a ferocity in her that came out when someone hurt her family. I could hear her voice in my head, steady and clear. "Arthur, don't let him do this to you." I didn't intend to. The morning of the wedding was brilliant. Blue sky, warm air, the rolling hills gone gold with October light. I dressed in my charcoal suit. I knotted my tie, the blue one, the one Helen had given me for our anniversary 20 years ago. I looked in the mirror. I looked like a father of the groom. Because that is what I was. I drove to the villa. I parked in the guest lot. I walked through the garden gate. The coordinator, a young Italian woman with a headset and a clipboard, stopped me at the entrance to the ceremony area. "Sir, your name?" "Arthur Bellamy," I said. "Father of the groom." She checked her list. Her face went careful in the way that faces do when they are trying to manage a situation they were not briefed on. "Mr. Bellamy, I'm afraid I don't see you listed for the ceremony seating." "That's all right," I said pleasantly. "Please let my son know I'm here." She hesitated. I smiled. It was a kind smile. I have been using it in business negotiations for 30 years. "I'll wait right here," I said. It took 4 minutes. I timed it. Then Ethan appeared from behind the rose arch at the end of the aisle, walking fast, his face flushed and tight. Vanessa was not with him, which told me she had sent him alone to deal with this without creating a scene in front of her family. "Dad." He stopped in front of me. He was wearing a beautiful suit. I had not been asked to contribute to it, but I noticed it had the cut of something expensive. "Dad, what are you doing here? I thought we agreed. We didn't agree to anything, I said. My voice was quiet and very even. You told me there was no seat for me. I came anyway, because this is my son's wedding and I paid for it and I am his father and I am here. You're going to embarrass everyone. He was almost whispering now, his eyes moving to the guests who were beginning to notice. Vanessa's parents are right there. Her grandfather came from Portugal. This is humiliating. Ethan, I said, I have one question for you, and I need you to think carefully before you answer it. When your mother died, who sat in the front row at her funeral and held your hand for 3 hours? He stopped. He opened his mouth and closed it. That is my seat, I said. I'm going to sit in it now. I walked past him. I walked down the aisle. Every head turned. I did not look at Vanessa, who I could see at the front, standing near her mother, her face a controlled mask of fury. I sat down in the third row, a pleasant, older man. Vanessa's uncle, I later learned, shifted slightly to make room and gave me a small nod. He had kind eyes. I nodded back. We did not speak. We did not need to. The ceremony happened. It was beautiful despite everything. The string quartet played something from Vivaldi. The Tuscan hills sat golden and indifferent behind the officiant. My son cried when he saw his bride coming down the aisle. I watched him cry and I thought, I taught you that. The capacity to feel that deeply, that comes from me and from your mother and from every difficult thing we ever walked through together. Then the reception. Open bar, 5 courses, 300 candles. I found my assigned table, the one Vanessa had chosen for me, which was, I noticed, the table farthest from the head table, tucked near the kitchen entrance. It was table 14. I was seated between a colleague of Vanessa's from her firm and a distant cousin from Portugal who spoke no English. Neither of them knew who I was. When the cousin asked, through hand gestures and a translation app, what my connection to the couple was, I smiled and typed, I paid for the party. He laughed. We got along fine after that. An hour into the reception, Ethan found me. He sat down in the empty chair beside me, and for a moment we just looked at each other. He had been drinking. Not heavily, but enough to soften the rehearsed edges. You really did it, he said. I did. Vanessa is. I know what Vanessa is. I know what Vanessa is, I said. He looked at his hands. The wedding band was new and bright on his finger. Dad, I'm sorry. About the call. About the seat. It was wrong. I looked at my son. He is a grown man. He has his mother's eyes, slightly too large for his face, which made him look perpetually startled as a child, and now makes him look perpetually sincere. I wanted to tell him it was all right. I wanted to absolve him the way I always had. But something had changed in me in the past 8 days, something that had needed to change for a very long time. I know you're sorry, I said, and we will talk, really talk, but not tonight. Tonight is your wedding. Go be with your wife. He left. I sat with the Portuguese cousin and ate 5 courses of exceptional food and drank a very good Chianti that I suspected cost more than it should have. At 10 o'clock, I left the reception. I drove back through the dark Tuscan hills to my hotel. Signora Ferretti had left a small lamp on in the entrance. I sat on the terrace with a glass of grappa and looked at the valley below, lit up with the lights of the villages. The next morning, I was back in Florence for a 7 a.m. coffee when my phone started ringing. Ethan. Then Vanessa, then Ethan again. Then a number I didn't recognize. Then Ethan 6 more times. 89 missed calls by the time I landed back in the States. What they were calling about, I learned later, was this. That morning, after I had left the reception, the villa's managing director had presented Ethan with an updated folio. The folio reflected several things. First, the catering overage. Vanessa had added a late-night dessert bar that had not been in the original contract, at an additional cost of $12,000 charged to the card on file. Second, a damage charge for a broken antique mirror in the bridal suite $6,500. Third, a corkage fee for 3 cases of wine the couple had brought in privately, against the villa's policy. Total additional charges, $21,400. When Ethan went to settle the folio that morning, the card on file was declined. I had, the night before, from the terrace of my hotel over a glass of grappa, called the card issuer and reported it compromised, all charges suspended pending investigation. The card was frozen. Ethan had no other card with that kind of limit. His own cards, I knew, were near their limits because I had been watching his credit utilization for 2 years. He called me. I did not answer. He called Paul Reeves. Paul answered, very politely, and explained that Mr. Bellamy had engaged him on a matter involving the misappropriation of funds transferred for a specific agreed purpose, and that until that matter was resolved, the credit facility would remain unavailable. Paul was very polite about it. He is excellent at being polite in ways that are completely terrifying. I did not make Ethan wait long. When I landed in New York and turned my phone back on, I called him. He answered before the first ring had finished. Dad. His voice was wrecked. Not angry. Wrecked. There is a difference. Angry means you think you're right. Wrecked means you know you're not. How much is it? I asked. $21,400. Dad, please. We're still at the villa. They won't let us check out until it's paid. They have our passports held at the front desk. That last part wasn't entirely accurate. Italian law is complicated about passports. But the general situation of being stranded with an unpaid bill in a foreign country was real enough. I'll pay it, I said. He exhaled. But first we're going to talk, I said. Right now. You and me. Not you and Vanessa. You. There was a pause. I heard him walk somewhere quieter. A door closed. Okay, he said. I'm listening. Ethan, I have given you money your entire adult life without conditions and without complaint. $40,000 when you were 26. A co-signed loan at 30, $150,000 for a wedding where I was assigned a seat near the kitchen. I have done all of that without asking for anything except to be treated like your father. He didn't say anything. I am not interested in punishing you, I said. I am not interested in holding the bill hostage. I am going to call the villa right now and pay it, but I need you to understand something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just agree with it so the money comes through. I hear you, Dad. I am 68 years old. I don't have 30 more years to keep waiting for you to remember that I exist outside of when you need my checkbook. I love you. I have always loved you, but love does not mean I have to disappear. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I checked to make sure the call was still connected. Then he said very quietly, I know, Dad. I'm sorry. I know you are. I should have told her no. When she started talking about the seating, I should have said no. Yes, I said. You should have. She has this way of making things seem reasonable until they're not. I know. I noticed that about her. He almost laughed. It was a broken, exhausted sound. She's not a bad person, Dad. I didn't say she was. I meant it. Vanessa is not a bad person. She is a person who optimizes. She had calculated that my presence cost her something and removed it accordingly. It was not evil. It was just the absence of the thing I had tried to raise Ethan to have, the understanding that some things are worth more than they cost. I'll call the villa, I said. Pay the bill. Come home when you're ready. And when you're back, come for dinner. Bring her. We're going to have a real conversation, the three of us. Okay, he said. And Ethan? Yeah. Next time you need to tell me something difficult, you call me yourself. You don't rehearse it, and you don't let her write the script. You call me, and you say it plain. That's what men do. A long pause. Yeah, Dad, I know. I called the villa. I paid the bill. Then I drove home through the New Jersey Turnpike in early evening traffic and thought about Helen the whole way. Thought about the last thing she said to me. The day before she went into the hospital for the last time. She took my hand and she said, "Don't disappear when he gets difficult. He's going to get difficult." She was always right. She is still right, even now, from wherever she is. Ethan and Vanessa came for dinner 3 weeks after they came home from the honeymoon. I made pot roast. Same pot roast I've been making since Ethan was 12 years old. His mother's recipe, the one she wrote on a note card that is still on my refrigerator in her handwriting. We sat at the kitchen table, not the dining room, the kitchen, and we talked. It was not a comfortable dinner. Vanessa was polite in the careful way of someone who has been briefed to be polite. Ethan was quiet in the way of someone carrying something heavy. I asked questions. I listened. I did not perform warmth. I did not feel. And I did not withhold the warmth that I did. At the end of the evening, when they were putting on their coats in the foyer, Vanessa paused and looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, Arthur." About the seating. That was wrong. It was not a great apology. It did not explain the calculation or acknowledge what it cost me. But it was real. I could tell the difference. I told her I appreciated it. I told her I hoped we could start over. I meant both things. Ethan hugged me at the door. He held on for a moment longer than usual. He is 41 years old and he smelled like the same shampoo he has used since college. I patted his back. "Good night, son." "Good night, Dad." I watched their car pull out of the driveway. I stood on the porch in the cold for a minute after the taillights disappeared. The yard was dark and quiet, the same yard Ethan used to run around in when he was 8 years old chasing fireflies with the mason jar, while Helen sat next to me on this same porch and told me she had never been so happy in her life. I went inside and cleaned up the kitchen and poured myself a small scotch and sat in the chair I have sat in for 30 years. It was quiet. It was very quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that is full rather than empty. The quiet of a conversation that was hard but necessary, of a thing that had been broken and was not yet fixed, but was at least being held together honestly. I am not a man who needs applause. I am not a man who requires grand gestures. I have reached the age where I understand that what you carry out of a room matters more than what you walked in with. What I carried out of that kitchen was not a victory. It was not a defeat. It was a boundary, firmly placed, and the tentative beginning of a relationship rebuilt on honest terms. I lost $150,000 on that wedding. I gained something I cannot put a number on. The knowledge that I will not disappear for anyone. Not for a seating chart. Not for a family tradition I was never asked about. Not for a daughter-in-law's comfort level or a son's desire to avoid a difficult conversation. My wife spent 11 years teaching Ethan that love means showing up. I intend to spend whatever years I have left teaching him the second half of that lesson. That the person who shows up also deserves a seat at the table. I read every comment you leave below. Tell me, was I wrong to go to that wedding? Would you have stayed home? And if you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people you love the most, I see you. You are not alone. Like this video, if you believe that a parent's love should never be treated like a blank check, subscribe, because I will keep telling these stories for as long as I have breath to tell them. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot since that trip to Tuscany. Not in any grand cosmic sense, just the plain, practical kind that you learn from running a business for 35 years. Every outcome has a chain behind it. Every moment of reckoning has a long list of smaller moments that built up to it quietly while you were looking the other way. I spent 40 years giving Ethan everything I had: money, time, presence, patience. And I gave it without conditions, which I believed was love. What I understand now is that unconditional giving, without any expectation of basic respect in return, doesn't produce gratitude. It produces entitlement, not because the person receiving it is bad. Ethan is not a bad man, but because that's simply what happens when you never allow someone to experience the weight of what they're receiving. When there are no edges to anything, nothing has shape. Nothing has value. That is the cause. The effect was a phone call 2 days before a flight to Italy, telling me there was no seat for me at a wedding I had financed entirely. That is what I had built. Without meaning to, over 4 decades of unconditional accommodation. What changed things was not the confrontation at the villa, and it was not the frozen credit card, and it was not even the dinner 3 weeks later where Vanessa looked at me and offered something that resembled an apology. What changed things was the decision I made sitting alone on my back porch in the dark, listening to the crickets, after I hung up on Ethan. The decision was simply this: I would not disappear. That sounds simple. It wasn't. Disappearing had been my default for years, disappearing from disagreements to keep the peace. Disappearing from Vanessa's calculations because confronting them felt unkind, disappearing from the seating chart because my son asked me to. Disappearing is easy when you spend a lifetime believing that love means making yourself smaller so the people you love can be larger. What I learned, not from a book, not from a therapist, but from sitting in a plastic chair at table 14 near the kitchen door at my own son's wedding, is that there is nothing noble about that kind of disappearing. It does not protect the people you love from the consequences of their choices. It just delays them and makes the consequences larger when they finally arrive. The morning after the wedding, when Ethan called 89 times from a Tuscan villa with an unpaid bill and a frozen credit card, he was experiencing something I had inadvertently protected him from his entire life: accountability. It was uncomfortable for both of us, but it was real, and real, even when it hurts, is always better than the comfortable fiction of a relationship built on one person endlessly absorbing what the other one takes. I am not sharing this story because I want sympathy, and I am not sharing it to make Ethan look like a villain, because he isn't one. I'm sharing it because I know there are people watching this who are sitting on their own back porch right now, in the dark, after a phone call that told them they don't have a seat at their own table. And I want those people to know that you are allowed to show up anyway. You are allowed to walk down that aisle and sit down and take up the space that belongs to you. You spent years earning it. The only thing I would tell my younger self, if I could, is this: love your children fiercely. Give them everything you have, but never give them the impression that you can be left at the airport and stay quiet about it. That is not love. That is just a habit you've outgrown, and it's time to break it.